Is this even a real motorcycle? This is one of the questions that I am having for the Zero DSRX, their flagship adventure bike, and it's the first electric motorcycle that we are having on the channel. And with that, welcome back to the freemilesmc. So first of all, this is quite a special bike because there's a lot of things different here than with a usual review of when it comes to the specs. This motorcycle has a 17.3 kilowatt hour battery that has 15.1 kilowatts that are constantly usable, and that combined with a brushless permanent air-cooled engine. That's now a lot of talk that's very different from how this stuff usually goes in a motorcycle review. We will get into these details later, but what does this result in power figures wise? This bike has 100 horsepower, quite average, quite normal, but here comes the kicker. This bike has 229 newton meters of torque. Those are insane numbers. This is stronger than the Rocket 3. Those are some really incredible numbers because this is an electric bike at the end of the day. And with this being an ADV bike, this is actually, from its weight, relatively normal for an ADV bike. It has 247 kilos, which I think can hang there with bikes like the BMW GS and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the range, we are talking about a range of around 180 kilometers realistically. I think it is listed with a range of like 230 or something, but like realistically you're going to get 180 out of this. And a charging time that is dependent on which kind of charger you actually have with the bike. We will get into that later. First of all, I want to name the questions that I have for this being electric motorcycle. First of all, how does it ride compared to a gas-powered motorcycle? How is the combination of the frame and the engine? How does that end up feeling? On top of that, how is it in day-to-day riding? Does the whole charging, waiting for the bike to be charged, does it result in a satisfying riding experience and a satisfying owning experience? Then on top of that, is this bike a real ADV bike? Is it adventure bike capable? That is a big one for me. And also on top of that, the general question that I have for electric motorcycles: how is the situation with ride to repair? We are kind of all a bit like burned children when it comes to that past with electric vehicles with Zero, but they recently released a manual for their models. So stuff looks very much on the bright side, and we're going to dive deep into what that actually means and how it's going to go in the future. On top of that, I want to look at how this bike compares price-wise from its very, very steep price tag of 23,500 bucks from the start. That's expensive, plus 500 euro charging cable, plus 300 euro adapter. So at the end of the day, we're talking basically 24,000 bucks, and you most likely will also have an extra that's going to cost you also another 3,000 bucks. So we're talking 23,500 to 27,000 bucks here. That's quite a lot of money. How does this compare over the time of ownership to way cheaper gas-powered motorcycle when it comes to the price of gasoline, when it comes to the price of repair? And another question that I have for this being an EV is: how environmentally friendly is this thing at the end of the day actually? Because this is a big question that always gets thrown around with EVs and electric motorcycles, that is also part of the culture war and all this kind of stuff. And let's get some actual information on that where I dive deep into that topic. So yeah, on top of that, the bike is very approachable. It's very big how it's standing here in front of me. All my friends who have seen the bike now are like, whoa, this is a big bike. But the seat height is only 828 millimeters. And that is very approachable. I can sit incredibly comfortable on this machine, even though I am relatively tall. It's hard to get on the bike, but when sitting on the bike, it feels very fine. For context, I am 6'5" or 1.95 meters, but I think also a person who's a lot smaller than myself could sit on this, and also a person who's a lot bigger at the same time. So let's jump into how this thing actually rides and get going.
So we're now on the road with the Zero DSRX, and with so many questions to answer, let's start with the most basic stuff on how does this engine frame combination even feel like as a motorcycle rider. It is pretty wild that it's not really an automatic feel, but you don't have the gears, you know, because the electric stuff is basically just one gear, but you always have the power on tap. You don't feel any workings of any kind. That's pretty wild. And that in combination with the motorcycle having zero internal vibrations and nothing like rotating in it, you have a very, very direct feel to the road. So the lost connectivity through you not having your own clutch and rev matching is gained again through the feel you have for the road with the motorcycle, and the feel for just leading the bike. You will instantly have a lot more courage on this motorcycle than you would on a gas-powered motorcycle, as there's just like less stuff to focus on, and you can just like hammer through the turns relatively quickly. Also, the bike just has a you really feel the very nice torque of the bike. I think the specs were 229 newton meters of torque. It does not exactly feel like that. It feels like it has less than that. That could have multiple reasons. Oh my god, like, I'm sorry, the connectivity you have to the road when just riding it through the turns without you having to focus on anything except riding it through the turns is actually pretty cool. I really like that. That is very, very nice, because you feel every bump in the road, and first that's a bit scary because you really feel what's going on underneath you, but after some time it actually makes you gain a bit more confidence that you really can feel how the tire is connecting with the road, and how the tire then, you know, the tire has contact with the road, and it's like has a full contact surface, but still the tire is like moving against the road with like leaning, and you feel every single bit of that. So we now switched over to sport mode, and we will be testing out how much power this bike actually has with its 229 newton meters of torque. And I mean, electric vehicles are notorious for just going off the line like crazy. So let's see, we don't have anyone behind us and anyone in front of us. Let's very carefully roll into the middle, 20 kilometers, and let's just go. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I'm very curious how quick that was at the end on the video, and also it was so simple to do because I needed to do nothing except twist open the throttle. It felt very quick, but it also felt not so super quick at the same time, because you don't have the whole engagement, you don't have the different vibrations from going back and forward from the different feels of the engine. It's very comparable to something like a variomatic transmission on a scooter, but it is pretty punchy, I have to say. With this being an ADV bike, let's see how it handles different kinds of roads and how much time we have until we need to charge and how all that kind of works. And yeah, let's go! We are now going to take this motorcycle down this dirt road, and for that we need to adjust the settings. This motorcycle has a lot of different modes. You can access them through these buttons. It works pretty well. There's a sport, standard, eco, and rain mode, and a canyon mode. So what do the different modes do? Rain, pretty self-explanatory. Eco has more of the engine brake that basically regenerates the energy for the motorcycle. And sport is basically all you can get. I basically mostly ride this motorcycle in eco or in sport. And then you have canyon. And in canyon it gets really interesting, because in canyon you can adjust the traction control and road yourself. And in canyon mode you can change the traction control and ABS settings to off-road. So that's basically the little hidden off-road mode that this motorcycle has. So let's go. We are here, of course, on complete street tires, and first thing that's really positive is, of course, you have to only focus on that you're doing all the riding correct, because you can just get up on the motorcycle and everything will do it the thing for you itself. We're now going up this little steep hill right here, and this is already a bit tricky because this is going up quite steep and we have street tires. Yeah, and we're not doing this. That instantly felt way too soft for my confidence, because if 247 kilos get stuck, good luck fixing that. And also with 23,500 bucks, not with me. We're finding a different path. But the suspension is soft enough for loads of rocks. I actually like that the bike is completely silent because you hear the forest around you. And I prefer hearing this the forest to a loud engine, and it also makes you feel alright because you know no one is hearing you and everything is fine. And no one is coming to get on your nerves. That's actually pretty cool. And I think enduro hiking can be very fun with this. You just have to be aware of its limitations. This it's an adventure bike. It's a heavy adventure bike, like most adventure bikes, and I have to tell you, we should start referring to these things as crossovers, including this one. And because at the end of the day, will be people who will be like, oh my god, but the range is not enough for my off-road crazy adventures that are like super remote or whatever. Dude, that's bullshit. The thing is, like, you do not want to go with this motorcycle where you're super remote, where you have problems finding a charging station. First of all, you will have a very hard time finding that type of place. Here in Europe, basically, it will get pretty hard to run out of that amount of charge. In the Banderas Reales, Pyrenees, all these places, you will be able to find civilization with a place to charge quick enough. And in the Americas, I think the situation is different. Yes, then this criticism is valid. But let's be honest, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. Like, the bike is too heavy. I earlier was too scared to drive into the sand. The off-road mode is that hidden. It is a crossover at the end of the day. And that's not a bad thing because that's what people want. People want the crossovers. Speaking of motorcycles, it's comfortable and it makes this bike actually a great commuter. So I'm not going to complain. One other thing while being here in the forest to review this motorcycle is belt driven, as you can see, and of course a belt drive is not exactly perfect for off-road use, as it cannot really handle the deep sand and deep mud that well, especially if the bike sinks in a bit. I would not really put my money on that. But it brings me nicely to the next topic, and that is what happens if something breaks on this machine and you, for example, have to replace a belt like that or anything else. And that brings me to the place that actually gave me this motorcycle to review, and that is JCB in Celle in Germany. There are a Zero dealership, and they were so nice to give me this motorcycle, and they also explained to me how these bikes look when they're built apart and the different components, and were also able to answer some uncomfortable questions. So huge respect to them and definitely a shout out.
Hey guys, welcome. We are here in JCB in Celle, and we are talking today about electromobility on two wheels. That means we are here with a Zero DSRX 70.3, and it's a full electric vehicle. You see it like this way. Of course, we are installing a 6 kW charger on top right now, but normally we are starting with a normal battery by 7.3 kilowatt hours and a normal onboard charger with 6.6 kW charging. And we have the engine right here. You see it by the 3 wires, and the 2 wires are coming from the battery. It's from another part, that's the controller, the motor controller. It's not installed this moment because we need to work on this part. Then the reason why it stands in this way is that we want to install the flat 6 kW charger on top. That means you are on a charging power by 12 kW and maybe an hour charging time to have a total charge from 0 to 100%. Yes, and it's not a really hard work. It's normally work like any other bike, by normal bikes that are working with fuel. The only thing you only have to be learning is a little bit more electricity, and then it's no problem to you, for you to work on these bikes in a safe way.
Short note from the editing room, like Konstantin just explained to you, those motorcycles are actually pretty simple to work on if you're a motorcycle mechanic. Only issue is just that in many garages you need to have learned a special trade to be working on these types of vehicles, and this trade will be more and more commonly available when people more learn stuff about EVs, as when you work on these machines you potentially can break something very expensive like the main power pack, and there's just a difference between breaking something like the main power pack and like a shitty carburetor. So that is one of the factors, and also you could potentially injure yourself. But that does not completely excuse the attitude that people have towards working on your own electric motorcycles. And a lot of that comes from Zero's company culture, because Zero held back owner's manuals for quite a long time. Now these owner's manuals are actually out, but sadly turns out that the owner's manuals are not any good really, because many of the typical maintenance jobs here are not properly described. For example, changing the brake pads when they are down, it's only described how like you see if they're down, but as soon as it comes to the process of how to change them, the owner's manual is lacking. Same comes when it comes to exchanging the front fork legs of the suspension. That is something that is usually described to help you change tires and potentially the simmer rings. None of that is here. Luckily, they're telling you how to adjust the belt, because if they would have left out that, I would have gotten real mad. But in comparison, some owner's manuals of other companies are describing all these things and are also even giving small little instructions for small repairs as well. It's a general trend that companies are doing this less and less, but a company like Zero, where Zero basically stands for zero emissions in the name, with basically them standing for a very sustainable company culture, kind of preventing people to work on their own bikes with this type of stuff does not look good. If you want to do anything on this motorcycle, you need to IKEA furniture your way through that shit. That is of course not the nicest, but there are a lot of unofficial resources online, like the unofficial Zero's owner's manual, as basically this lack of information has already basically spawned a whole surrounding culture of working your way around these things. On top of that, the diagnostic tool, the Zero Diagnostics utility, is of course locked behind a key code. That's completely understandable. Many companies do that. BMW, Triumph, all of them, Yamaha, they do that to kind of get in some money for their own stores. When it comes to any of the plugs and how to get information out of the bike, they are all standard plugs, like standard OBD plug and all that kind of stuff. So nothing special there. Yeah, in general, Zero just has a bit of an odd company culture when it comes to this, and it's a whole thing that's going through the EV thing and through a lot of modern motorcycles today. If those bikes would have been made in the 80s, I think this would be a totally different story. For example, though some of the older Zeros did include microtransactions, this is not the case on this motorcycle. And also certain upgrades, like for example the power tank, are not to be recommended, and that is because the power tank uses battery cells that have a different chemistry inside them, because they have been from basically how they have been developed for the older models. And you don't need to be an electric engineer to find out that mixing chemistry in a battery is just a shit idea. And on top of that, if you already have a used power pack, of course it has some drained cells in it, and an EV is always going to use the very powerful cells first when accelerating. So you're basically just absolutely stomping that little power tank. So that one is not to be recommended. Here again, huge shout out to JCB and Celle, as they have openly communicated a lot of these things with me and also do so with their customers. If you get a bike like that, find yourself a store that does that exactly like they did. And we're now here in the evening. It sadly already gets dark super early here in Autumn, and we need to get back to something that I mentioned earlier, and that is the price of this motorcycle, and that's 23,500 bucks. And that is very, very expensive, and you can buy a lot of different bikes and multiple bikes and more power and whatever, all for that kind of money, which really makes this a very specialized machine that's basically for a very niche market of people who are really into this, who are really into electric motorcycles and EVs. And to some of you that maybe sounds weird, but those people exist. This is a niche that is very active on Reddit, very active on all those social medias discussing about these machines. And these people also have the money to back this interest up, which kind of makes this a specialized enthusiast toy, basically. That's what it is at the end. But I actually want to put the focus also on another group of riders that could be very interested in this bike. Because with this being an adventure bike, very comfortable ergonomics, good wind protection, and also heated grips, you can ride this bike all year long, very comfortably for commuting and everyday riding. And with this a big price tag, there needs to be a way around it to make this bike work for someone. And that's actually where my idea comes in, which is a bit odd, but hear me out for a second. You could get this vehicle as a company motorcycle. Yes, you heard me right. Why am I recommending to get the Zero DSRX as a company vehicle? It is because this is an electric motorcycle, so it's incredibly fun. You have nice acceleration, you have all the good stuff of a motorcycle. You're basically getting back to work and from work perfectly worth the range. And there is basically in every country in the European Union and also in the US tax reductions for the monetary advantage you get of a vehicle that a company gives to you. In Germany, in my home country, that is 0.25% of the purchasing price of a vehicle like that. And this motorcycle is not competitively priced compared to other motorcycles, but to EVs. Here we have the Renault Zoe that the company that my dad works for has gotten him to drive places. It's a very average company car that a lot of people drive around in Europe, but those things are expensive. For a company to buy this for an employer, it's 43,000 bucks. And here having the Zero, that's 23,000 bucks. That's only half. So you're paying half in tax, and the company is paying a lot less in purchasing price. Also, those vehicles are in some countries, there's financial aid for companies to actually buy these. So this could be a very good way to convince your boss of getting you this as a company vehicle. A bit of an odd one, a motorcycle as a company vehicle, but would be quite fun and also a good way to move around the 23,500 bucks price tag. And with maybe a bit of government help, it could also be very interesting for someone who's self-employed. Speaking of daily use, let's get this thing hooked up to the charger so we can see how it is in day-to-day life tomorrow. Let's go.
So we're back the next day and let's see how some touring on the machine actually does. We are right now, we've seen how the bike does off-road, and we're right now here on the road, and I've already done 28 kilometers. So let's see how far we can get with a good mix of riding. Now let's see how this thing actually handles in a bit of longer swept turns. So let's go. I actually have the bike here in sport mode, so properly giving it the beans. One thing that I like about how the bike handles, the throttle feels very connected to the engine, in the sense of you feel like the inputs are very direct. It doesn't feel like a Game Boy input, basically. This feeling though is lost as soon as you go over 120, 130 kilometers, because here you still have insane amounts of acceleration. Something in general is going on where for some reason limited to 120. The bike now doesn't go above 120. I don't know why that is the case. So we have a very slight technical problem. For some reason the bike doesn't go over 120 in sport mode. However, it really does in the standard mode. Whee! Yeah, the acceleration, especially between 100 and 150 and all over the place, is just really insane. And we're now doing a bit here of our little adventure tour with all a bit of different kinds of road and how it would actually be to tour the machine. And first of all, while having again a bit of fun here in the turns, the bike also really nicely performs in the longer swept turns, and the feel for the bike is just really good, because you don't have any irritations from the engine. You only feel the tires and the suspension, and that is very good. Yeah. One thing that I do have to say, this bike should be ridden very careful for someone who's new to motorcycles, because it's just intense how quickly this bike gets very quick and you don't have any other feedback. So maybe you don't really realize it, and then all of a sudden there's the turn. But in general, it's a lot easier to drive. Of course, you know, while driving all quick, we're really punishing the battery, because like, since we're on this road, we started with I think 85-87%, and we've been going over the road now here twice, and for like the past 15 minutes since my camera's running, and we're down to 66%. So if you really give the bike the beans, of course it's going to consume its energy. So really, for very passionate riding, you're going to consume 1% per kilometer basically as soon as you get like with constant hard acceleration, driving above 140 and stuff like that. Yeah, so with passionate riding we went from 87 down to 63 in the span of 12 minutes. Well, 13 minutes, and then you had some time to get going and turn on the camera. So yeah, if you're constantly hammering the thing, it's going to get out of battery quick. Let's go and charge the motorcycle. What range did we get out of it? I now hypermiled behind some semi-trucks for wind protection, and I managed to get 101 kilometer out of what we drove today now, and 15 kilometers we still have left. That was with passionate riding and basically driving for fun. Okay. Yeah, this charger fits. The charger is biased to one side, but whatever. Let's go. So apparently you can directly pay over the payment module and don't need an app or anything. So let's see. Are you fucking kidding me? Payment Modul außer Betrieb? So we now managed to create an account and we're going to charge now. How it looks. So, Ladefehler. What the fuck is this? Oh nein, jetzt muss ich das alles wieder ausfüllen. Ich krieg doch einen Fimmel hier, Alter. So, the thing now is charging. 15%, 1% more than before. Let's take the key out and go inside and hide from the rain.
So we're now back at the motorcycle, and the motorcycle has been standing here for 43 minutes and has gotten 40% while charging, which is pretty good because I've basically not waited. I've gotten some food, went through a shop, looked at some stuff and got back here. Of course, if you're a very active person, you're going to outride the charging pace of this motorcycle, which also could happen to me. But I think if you're a bit older and a bit more relaxed, that's going to be all fine. In general, how is it with the charging when it comes to big touring? When it comes to big touring, of course, you're at some point going to be busy kicking some rocks until the thing is done, especially when doing big highway miles. As we have seen, if the bike rides quick, it's going to run out of battery pretty quickly. So most likely doing a big tour from here to Munich could become a bit of a pain in the ass. But apart from that, it does the daily touring, which most ADV bikes are used for, pretty fine. And when it comes to commuting, it goes really, really well. I plugged the thing in last night at my parents' place. We now got some charge, drove a bit around, charged the thing. I'll now be going back, plugging the thing back in, and in many cases, when you're just going to work and back from work, you can basically always have the thing charged. So the charging is not the biggest hurdle after all. One thing that I'm actually a bit picky about is actually the range, because the range can be quite high, but that requires the perfect driving style for it. And if I mean going the speed limit in the city and going the speed limit then like on the cross-country road, that really means the speed limit. No, not like just slightly over, no, the speed limit. You will be driving 49 kilometers an hour in the city and 90 to 99 basically on the cross-country road if you want to get good range out of this thing, and on the highway maybe 110, but not over that, otherwise this thing is going to run out of battery relatively quickly. Of course, for basic commuting stuff, this is perfectly sufficient, and in day-to-day life works actually really, really well, I have to say. If you're just going to work and back, run a bit of your errands, you actually save the time you would usually spend at the gas station and always wake up to the thing being completely full. So that actually works really well. Also, if you occasionally do a break while riding, you should be pretty much fine. Like all the smokers of you guys, you most likely will never manage to run out of battery. But like for someone like myself, when I drive, I basically on the open road, if I want to get somewhere, I'm driving, getting gas 2 times and then take a big break. In a sense of big break, getting like a small coffee and sitting somewhere for it some time. So yeah, that's basically how this thing handles day-to-day life. So I've now spent some time with the Zero DSRX, and what are my thoughts about it? And also we still have a few of our beginning questions open. And first of all, let's start. We talked quite a bit about the price of 23,500 bucks, and that's quite a lot of money. How does that actually compare to a fuel injected motorcycle like over the time of ownership? For comparison's sake, I took a motorcycle with a purchasing price of 10,000 kilometers and with an average fuel consumption, and calculated how much running cost that motorcycle would have to catch up with this Zero motorcycle, assuming that you commute with the motorcycle every day of basically your work year, so 230 days, and 2 times a month go on a 250 kilometer trip. So with all that, this motorcycle actually runs cheaper at some point due to you saving also money on oil changes and clutch wear and services and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, a fuel motorcycle will catch up with this after 14 years. Of course, this is now a very unprecise calculation, as like stuff with like a battery breaking or something can get in here and you will be replacing a battery in that time at some point. Actually, speaking of that, the battery has a 5-year warranty, and the whole motorcycle overall has a 2-year warranty, but I don't really know what's supposed to break on this, like at least of the 2-year warranty part. With the battery, of course, it can become tricky, but everything is covered up until 5 years, and for the people that are interested in this bike, they're most likely people who buy and sell a motorcycle also in this kind of time frame. So 14 years is quite a bit, so that kind of makes this motorcycle only interesting for people who have the money and who are very enthusiastic about electric motorcycles. Because even though this is a really, really great bike, I love how it handles. The Showa suspension with 160 millimeters definitely does its job well. I actually love a few things about the bike very, very much, like the silent riding of you just hearing the wind and you having this light humming noise of the engine, and you feel how the tires are pressing the water away on the wet road, and you hear that. If I would have to compare it to something, it's basically like when you go surfing and you pedal into a wave and the board is just gliding over the wave and you just hear and then you hear the wave breaking after you. That's kind of how it feels to accelerate this motorcycle on a wet road, because at some point the wind takes over and it's just a really, really nice feel. But overall, I have to say, the whole range thing is really an issue, because if you ride this motorcycle passionately, you will get very little range out of it. In 12 minutes of passionate riding, I reduced the charging amount so much that when I started with 98% in the morning, I actually only managed to get 110 kilometers out of this machine, which is relatively crazy, because if you assume that you would ride this motorcycle in a curvy mountainous area and then just go full throttle basically all the time, you would end up with most likely reaching underneath 100 kilometers if you would really push it. On the other hand, if you're just like commuting, it's definitely fine. This is a bike that's on a commuter level pretty much unbeatable, because you can just charge it. You can charge it at home, you can charge it at work, and for the people that live outside of a big city and need to commute into the city, this is actually pretty cool. But at that point, it kind of becomes necessary to compare this motorcycle to an electric car. And of course, it has a few disadvantages to an electric car. It's only roughly half the price of many electric cars. And you can have this as a company vehicle. For those people, it's also pretty interesting. And also, if you are in a city that's really busy, like the metropolitan areas, Paris, Rome, London, those cities, then it's probably pretty cool also, because you get free parking and all those types of things. When I lived in Paris, like, I remember the day that the motorcycles got the new parking rights, and it got then pretty difficult pretty quickly, but at the same time it was the first time when the city was quiet, and also you were not at constant risk of getting run over by a motorcycle. So in some ways those types of policies are beneficiary to the general population, and an electric motorcycle can really be a game changer there. So for those people, it is pretty good. So for this very niche application compared to an electric vehicle, it is pretty decent. General, when finding charging stations, you will always find a place to charge, but it's not like with a gas station that you just find a place to charge on the way out of convenience. No, you kind of always have to get out of your way to look for one, and that can become a bit stressful. When talking about this whole thing, I feel like one question that really comes up, especially in the whole electric motorcycles versus fuel-injected motorcycles, is how environmentally friendly is this thing at the end of the day. I'm trying to keep it short because I will make a whole dedicated video about this, but as the basics, this motorcycle in its production is going to release about 2,600 kilograms of CO2 into the air, and while running, these electric motorcycles highly depend on the grid mix that is available in a country. But here comes the kicker: no matter how bad the grid mix is, even if it's just like coal energy all the way, they are still having a better balance than a fuel-injected motorcycle. And of course, then the grid mix greatly varies from like 380 grams per kilowatt hour, I think, in Germany, 390 in the US, or something ridiculous like 53 in Norway. And basically what that results in is that this motorcycle produces 200 grams of CO2 on a very good grid mixture and 4 kilos of CO2 on 100 kilometers on a very bad grid mixture. That is in both cases a lot better than the 9.9 kilograms of CO2 emitted by an average gas-powered motorcycle. So no matter how bad the grid mixture is, this thing beats it from its emission standpoint, definitely. Good grid mixture and 4 kilos of CO2 on 100 kilometers on a very bad grid mixture. That is in both cases a lot better than the 9.9 kilograms of CO2 emitted by an average gas-powered motorcycle. So no matter how bad the grid mixture is, this thing beats it from its emission standpoint, definitely. For comparison's sakes, a gasoline-powered motorcycle has, in its production, is going to cost you about 500 to 1,000 kilograms of CO2. So basically, it is this motorcycle has to drive. So basically, the equivalent of the gas-powered motorcycle driving between 5,000 to 10,000 kilometers. If those bikes would be driving more, of course, the bikes are both driving at the same time. With these values of how much CO2 then these motorcycles are producing while they're driving compared to their production emission, these motorcycles will, depending on the grid mixture, meet each other roughly between 10,000 to 25,000 kilometers on the road. Which is actually pretty crazy. Before researching this video, I assumed it would be a lot worse, and it turns out to be actually pretty decent, as I bought my Royal Enfield Interceptor about a year ago, right at roughly half year, and I'm like at 20,000 kilometers. So you really have that stuff back in relatively quickly. Of course, a lot of those emissions are produced through mining rare materials like cobalt and lithium. And those are rare materials. We will run out of these materials in the next 50 to 100 years. I will make a more complicated video on that. And of course, the conditions in those that those are mined are not the greatest, which kind of brings me to my resume on the question, are those motorcycles environmentally friendly? So what's my resume on those motorcycles being environmentally friendly? I have to say those bikes are definitely more environmentally friendly than their gas-powered equivalent. That is a fact, no discussion about it. However, there is a slight problem with the whole mindset around these motorcycles and motorcycles in general, and something that really gets into the way of this kind of sustainability, and it's not the fault of Zero, and it's not the fault of any kind of EV company. It's just, if you always have to sell more and more and more and constantly have numbers going up and basically always need to expand the market, and that in all kind of regions, no matter how sustainable something becomes, you will reach the end of it relatively quickly. I don't really believe that you can consume yourself to a better future at the end of the day.